speakers and has been that way for many years. I'd like to add to Ian's welcome to welcome you all for coming here today and helping us in this celebration of the life of Graham Crouch. I want to thank the Box Hill Athletic Club for hosting this event. Jeremy Griffith and the committee have been very supportive in setting this event up today. A particular welcome to Elke Jentsch, Graham's wife, who's come here from Germany to be with us today also, and she'll be speaking to us in just a few minutes. I also want to welcome Graham's family, his immediate family, his brother Richard and wife Kathleen and sons Ash and Chris. Very good to see them here today and welcome. And of course I welcome all of you and making this occasion what we hope will be a very fitting memory for Graham. We have, as well as Elke, who's come a particularly long way, we have quite a few other participants who've come from interstate and overseas, and thank you for making the effort to be here today. We also have a contingent from Ballarat, and of course Ballarat was where Graham first grew up. Ballarat remained really his hometown, even though he ended up living in other places around the world for that matter. He was always a Ballarat boy. You couldn't take the Ballarat out of Graham. Just to give you a little outline of the program today, we want this event to be very much an informal event. And the main part of tonight's event will be you people mixing with each other and telling stories about Graham, meeting up with people that you haven't seen for 20 years, maybe more, and getting reacquainted, and in that way honouring Graham and remembering Graham. So in line with keeping it informal, we're not going to have a long session of speakers. We just have 6 speakers, and we've asked each of them to confine themselves to 5 minutes, and so you in the audience can help me with the invigilation of that. Without any further ado, I'll introduce the first of our speakers. Oh, I should say that after the speakers, we intend to have a lap of honour around the track. It's voluntary. You don't need to be so concerned. I know it's further than most of the sprinters have ever run, but yeah. So a lap of honour, you can walk, you can jog, you can run. You can do 1 lap, you can do 2 laps, you can do 4 laps. After that, there are refreshments, light refreshments, and some memorabilia and a video running upstairs in the Graham Olden room. And there's, among the light refreshments, I believe that Megan and Barbara have provided scones with jam and cream. So that will probably result in a stampede during the lap of honour. There's one other thing I should mention. The banner behind me, the Olympic banner, has been donated by the Australian Olympic Committee specifically for this occasion, so I do thank them for that. I don't think there's anything else I need to mention at this stage. If I think of something, I'll mention it during the course of events, but we'll now ask Elke if she could come forward and she wants to say a few words to you. So would you join me, please, in welcoming Elke? You want me to hold it, or you?
Let's see how we go. So, I'm a teacher actually, and I'm used to talk to people, but younger ones, so it's not easy for me to stand here in front of you and talk. But it feels good for me to see how many people have come here today to pay their respect to Graham and remember him. Graham was an extraordinary person. You know that maybe more than I do. We met by pure chance in Stockholm, and neither of us would think at our first very brief encounter what perfect match we would be for each other. We had an amazing journey together. Yes, he was an extraordinary person. It took me a few emails to find out that he was a former athlete and an Olympian even. He would keep very quiet about these things, so that was him. And his mom once told me the initials of Graham Douglas Crouch stood for guts, determination, and courage, and plus huge mental strength and incredible confidence in himself. So these things describe him very well. Graham was not, so this was not his true nature only in his sport. It was also how he would tackle his illness. So that was very brave and with determination too. So when he came home from his last day in hospital, he said, I have to get back to exercise, which was then doing weights with 2 huge water bottles, push-ups and squats, leaning against our dining table and going up and down the 5 steps from the landing. And I have to get strong for treatment, he said. And I knew by then, doctors had told me that nothing could be done for him anymore. But that was Graham. So giving up or giving in was never an option for him. He was a very exceptional person. He would never complain, and he did not allow any what-ifs. He did not allow any looking back. He always said, we are here now, and we attack whatever is there to be attacked. And being this person, he helped me to be strong and to do this part of our journey together. And to cope and get through these tough times. And I think this was the strategy for him to cope with all this himself. To me, he was the best partner I could think of. To many of you, to my daughter and son, he was a friend, a mentor, advisor, even like a second dad. So thank you, Cruffy, for all this, for how you inspired us and still inspire us. You will be missed.
Thank you very much, Elka. I appreciate how difficult that was, and you did very, very well. Thank you. For those of you who don't know, Graham was first diagnosed with bowel cancer, lower bowel cancer, just over a year ago, in January of last year. He didn't want it to be widely known. He only confided in a very small number of people and asked them not to spread the word. So most of us didn't know until right near the end, or even after the end. And it came as a shock, I know, to many people. But the struggle that Graham had during 2019 and that Elka shared with him in that struggle was a huge struggle. And it's a credit to you, Elka, that you're able to come here today and share those stories with us. Thank you. I now want to introduce Graham's brother, Richard, who will be able to tell us a little bit. Most of us here knew Graham as an athlete, but we're going to hear about Graham as a brother. And I welcome Richard now to the microphone.
Thanks, Ian, and thanks everyone for coming today. What a fitting location to be here this afternoon for what we're calling Remembering Graham. For many years, Box Hill Athletic Club was a second home for Graham. The Barlow stand is also an appropriate for Graham, as he had such a long-standing relationship with Ellen Barlow. Another passion of Graham's was catching up with many friends. The Crouch family, our parents, Mum Una and Dad Morris, were born and raised in Ballarat, Victoria. They both came from hard-working, modest families, and these were the values that they passed on to Graham and myself. They would say to us that as long as you've done your best, we cannot ask any more. You only get out of life what you put into it. Don't ask anyone to do what you won't do yourself. Graham Douglas Crouch was the firstborn child of the family on the 11th of January 1948 in Ballarat. When Graham was born, Graham had a club foot, and in his early months required plaster on his foot to straighten his foot. And I guess this has made us feel even more special about him with his athletic achievements. From birth, he was always small and was the smallest in the classroom for his age. And this did not change during his life. This even included the TV commentator calling him the Little Australian. This was not a negative for him, and I believe it only made him more determined to strive harder. As a child, he was happy and energetic and enjoyed life to the fullest. Got just a few examples here, and some of these are what I've been told because it was before my time. He wrote a letter to Mum and Dad from school at age 7. Dear Mummy and Daddy, I hope you are well. This is a small note to let you know that I am very well at school. I had 100 bottles of milk to drink at playtime and had a very nice race at the showgrounds, and I won the race at playtime. He's talking about his running at an early age. Graham was given money for lunch at primary school. When he came home, Mum asked him what he bought for lunch. He said he didn't buy any lunch, and when she asked for the money, when asked for the money, he said, I didn't require it, so I threw it away. Something changed as throwing money away was certainly not the Graham that I knew. Graham had 9 years as an only child until I was born. As a toddler, I would move things in his bedroom while at school, and he would know that things were in a different position. He'd come home and say, what's that menace done today? I won't talk about his gardening skills. As when mentioned, he would just roll his eyes and say, here we go again. Suffice to say that he didn't get asked to do it again, and he didn't volunteer it either. Elka and I were looking through some of Graham's memorabilia when I was in Lingenfeld in November, December. I thought that I'd seen everything of Graham's memorabilia over the years, but amongst this was a homemade paper booklet that he made when he was 8. In the paper cuttings, it was from January to March 1956 of John Landy, and the pictures were showing him picking up Ron Clark when he fell at the race, and also on John Landy's athletic running tips and style. So it just shows that at such an early age that Graham took the interest and really drove that passion. During his primary school years, Graham went to 4 different schools, 2 in Ballarat, Warrnambool and Hamilton, and adapted very easily. He was a good scholar, loved reading difficult books, very good at maths, and he enjoyed his school life. He received a scholarship to attend Ballarat College for his secondary school education and always received high grades. He was also involved in most sports, including cricket, tennis, Aussie rules, obviously as a rover. His athletics potential in middle and distance events for school sports and inter-school sports emerged. Time at school was pleasurable for Graham. Post-school, Graham studied accountancy at night school and worked in full-time clerical position. He also trained 3 times a day. He joined the Ballarat East Athletics Club and quickly showed his athletic potential. His talents were spotted and then joined Box Hill Athletic Club, where he travelled from Ballarat to Box Hill for training and for weekend meetings. Athletics became a family event. Our family grocery store in Ballarat was purchased to enable Graham to work around his overseas travel for extended period of time, and it was also allowed me to chase my dreams. Mum returned to work for full time after 20 years, and Dad was also involved as well as running his other business. I think that shows our parents' true commitment to our lifestyle. We would travel to attend and support him at many events. Many trips to Olympic Park over the years for state championships and also national championships, and also see him break the 4-minute mile for his first time. Mum and Dad went to the Commonwealth Games in Christchurch in 1974, for which was a fantastic race and known as a milestone race, where he ran the 3:34.2. Our family trip to Montreal in 1976 Olympic Games was a highlight, and to be in the stadium for the 2 qualifying races and ultimately the final, an achievement that was not repeated for another 40 years. We were very proud to be present and see the little Aussie in the final. Another family tradition was to support the Geelong Cats. We all know how passionate Graham was about the Cats. We would go to games at Cardinia Park to support them. This would not stop Graham from missing his training. We'd stop at Buninyong on the way home, and that's where he would run home from Buninyong. I think he had measured it to the post that we had to stop at, so he was running the correct distance. Graham's first overseas trip in '69 to Tokyo for the Pan-Pacific Games. For the 50 years since, he would have travelled overseas most years, firstly competing himself, or as in latter years coaching or mentoring role for athletes who were committed to achieving high goals. He often referred to his training as thrashing the body, and believed that his body needed the hard work. This also included the belt training sessions that he always used to have with Alan Barlow. Daily notes were entered of his training in the diary. Training in Ballarat's cold weather would not deter him from running around Lake Wendouree on cold, icy mornings. Just on my family, I married Kathleen in 1981, and Graham now had the closest sister that he could have, a sister-in-law. Our 2 boys, Ash and Chris, now 30 and 34, have always been fascinated to hear Graham's activities, stories and his achievements. Graham, as a proud uncle was always interested in following their progress and hearing their experiences. They were both amused with his older cars and how he just drove them and did not maintain them as well as he maintained his body. At age 5, Ash was very proud when he was taken into Olympic Park and Graham took him onto the training track. And Chris, at age 10, insisted on running next to Graham at the end of the torch relay in Ballarat for the 2000 Olympic Games. Since then, they've always asked, when are we seeing Graham, especially on trips from Germany? Am I over the 5 minutes? In 2007, Graham announced that he had a lady friend in Germany, Elke. Graham never looked for the easiest solutions, but dating by Skype proved really successful. With short visits on trips down under, it was on Christmas 2016 when we got to know Elke when she spent her first Christmas down under and had a summer Christmas. August 2019, Kathleen and I spent 2 weeks in Germany whilst he was in hospital. Unfortunately, that was the last time we saw Graham. On my visit in November, I had arrived too late to see him. This has been and remains a sad time for all of us with the loss of Graham from our lives. We all have special memories of him to treasure. He was modest, genuine and professional, and at all times a great mentor. As Elke said, GD always it was for guts and determination. Graham, you leave a large hole in our family that cannot be filled. Thank you for the great memories that our family have of you. His fighting spirit was displayed right to the final finish line. He would be saying, you can't look back, only forward. It's time to move on, folks. Graham, Gruffy, Crouchy, rest in peace.
Thank you, Richard. That was lovely. Just before I introduce Bruce Jones, who'll be our next speaker, just to let you know, we've put the word around that we're quite happy for the younger athletes to continue with training on the track during this service. In fact, we thought it was a fitting backdrop to the event tonight, so don't be at all perturbed about that. Our next speaker is Bruce Jones, who happens to be my brother, but of course I can't do anything about that. And Bruce was Australian cross-country champion a couple of times, I think, and then in the 70s, late 70s, he went to live in New Zealand and ended up representing New Zealand also at the World Cross Country Championships. At that time, he raced and ran with Graham quite a lot. So Bruce is going to bring us some reflections and some messages from across the Tasman.
Thank you, Ian. I timed this morning and it goes for 3 minutes and 13 seconds, so Ian, you can relax. Ian is 6 years older than me, and as I was growing up, he delighted in giving me nicknames, and a number of them weren't very complimentary. But one that he did give me later on was Dermot, and Graham loved it. And for the next 50 years, whenever we bumped into one another, Graham always said, "Hi, Dermot." And he's the only person to do that, so I'll miss Graham for that, if for many other reasons as well. Peter Fitzinger, the CEO of Athletics New Zealand, would like me to read the following. To Elke, to Graham's family, and the Australian athletic community. On behalf of Athletics New Zealand, please accept our heartfelt condolences on the passing of Australian middle distance great Graham Crouch. He was in the thick of many great races, including Christchurch in 74, Gothenburg 75 and Montreal 1976, and was truly in the top tier of 1500 metre runners. New Zealand athletics has had our own great losses recently, with the passing of Dick Quacks in 2018 and Sir Peter Snell in December last year. So we share a sense of the sadness that the Australian athletics community must be feeling. Graham, from across the Tasman, we salute your many accomplishments, and you will go down as one of the great racers over 1500 metres and the mile. John Walker will be well known to you all. The first man to break 350 for the mile in Gothenburg and Olympic gold medalist in Montreal in the 1500 in 1976. He would like to be here today, but is unable to do so, and has asked me to pass on his tribute to Graham. I first met Graham in 1974 at the Commonwealth Games in Christchurch. He was an integral part of what has been called the greatest foot race of all time, the 1500 metres. As the Aussies and Kiwis always stuck together on the European circuit, we became great friends as we travelled and raced together. Graham was incredibly loyal and talented, and as the years went by, he used his credibility and tenacity to introduce young Australian athletes to the circuit. He was keen to see that they succeeded and kindly shared all his knowledge and skills with them. His ability on the track was well known, and he never let his small stature hold him back. After we both retired, he kept in contact, and it was always a pleasure to see him somewhere in the world. Rest in peace, Graham, and much love to Elka, his family and friends. John Walker.
Thanks, Bruce. Next, we're going to hear from Denise and Ray Boyd. Denise and Ray don't really need any introduction from me because they are legends in Australian sport. Each of them won many Australian championships, Denise in the sprints and Ray in the pole vault. And they represented their country at Olympic Games and Commonwealth Games and other sorts of games and events as well. Denise and Ray have been lifelong friends of Graham, really, and have got to know Elka very well also over the last decade. So it's with great pleasure that I hand the microphone to them, and thank you for coming down from Queensland for this event today. Thank you.
Thanks, Ian. Ian's correct. Ray and I have been lifelong friends of Graham. In fact, 50 years for Ray. Ray and Gruff went away in a Pacific Conference Games team to Japan in 1969, and that was their first Australian teams. I met Graham a little later, I guess when he became Graham Crouch with that famous race in New Zealand. But prior to that, he really paved the way for lots of Australian athletes in Europe. He was a bit of a trailblazer, I guess. I mean, when the likes of Kerry O'Brien, Ron Clark, Derek Clayton were competing in Europe in the late 60s, early 70s, Graham also headed over there, and he learned his trade. He raced a couple of times a week to add to what he'd done for the club here in Ballarat. He raced often in interclub, as we all did in those days. And he was particularly helpful for me in introducing me to meet promoters who I could make contact with in the next 10 years to arrange meets in Europe. Managers weren't available to us in those days. We did it all ourselves and travelled without a coach. He was also helpful to Ray. I remember there was one year, I think it was 1979, that I stayed home to train for the Moscow Olympics, to spend a winter in Australia. And that was before internet and mobile phones, and Gruffy was going to meet up with Ray in Frankfurt. So I go into British Airways, I think it was, to book flights and also accommodation, an overnight accommodation. And Elka and Ray and I were speaking about this today. So they hand me the big thick book with all the hotels. And I didn't go past A, and I selected the Ambassador Hotel in Frankfurt because it was close to a train station. And I thought, well, I knew they were being picked up the next day to go to Sotkamo, which was right at the very north of Finland. Was it Finland? And so I booked them into, and off Ray went. He flew in with his poles and landed at Frankfurt, went to the hotel and went straight to bed. Then hours later, there's a knock on the door, and Gruffy's here and says, "Do you know where we are?" He said, "Frankfurt," and said, "We're right in the middle of the red light area." And Denise had booked them there. But look, there's lots and lots of stories about Gruffy, how he spent most of the time of the Munich Olympics in the village. The New Zealanders had a spare bed, and he used to go running in and out every morning, just in his shorts and runners, hello to the guard on the gate, and they would let him go. No ID, nothing. But he was, he'd be everywhere. He was everywhere for us personally too. He was at our wedding in '78. He was at Ray's 50th, I recall. He and Elka even drove from Langenfeld to a little lake in Germany where Alana competed in a pole vault event. And he was always very interested in our family. He, as I said, he paved the way for lots of us to follow. Every Cup day, we would go to his place for many, many years. He'd have a friend who was a bookie. There was even one year when I think he went to the States and he left the key, and we let ourselves in. We had our fun and even phoned him on his home phone to say that we were there. But whilst there's many stories about Gruff, there's one, the story that beats all stories, and Ray can tell you about that, and that's how he met Elka.
I think I have got the best job, the best story. It was his best story.
It was back in September 2000.
I won't look at you. Okay.
Yeah. Back in September 2007, wasn't it? Where
7.
in 2000. Oh no.
No.
Before that, how it all started. That Gruffy was on
So
his way
in
home,
2007, Gruff was in Stockholm, and he was staying with friends. He'd heard that the King and Queen were going to go past a certain corner the next day, and he thought, I'm going to go down and get a photo. So he finds a spot, and he's ready, he's waiting. There's movement in the crowd. The carriage starts to come down the road. Gruffy stands up and he's ready to take the shot, and this blonde-headed chick jumps in front of him and starts firing away. So Gruff's missed his chance. So he says to this girl, thanks very much for that. Like, I've been waiting here for an hour and you've just spoiled the shot. And of course, it was Elka, and she apologised profusely and said, look, I'm so sorry. Give me your email address and I'll share the photo with you. So that was that, and that was that brief encounter. So they went their separate ways. Gruff came home. I spoke to Gruff and he told me what had happened. And so I said, so why are you telling me this story? It's not much of a story. And he said, well, I'm actually talking to her on email. And we've got a little bit of a thing happening. So I said, Gruff, mate, I'm proud of you. You know, because you'd say to him at times, how's your love life, Gruff? And he'd say, that's all right, don't you worry about that, you worry about yourself, you know. He was always coy. Or he'd call on the hearing aid one, where I can't hear you. You know. You never could tell whether he heard you or didn't want to hear you. So anyway, he tells me this story, and so I'm sort of telling my friends about this chance meeting, and then this photo arrives, and then there's talk and more talk. And then got onto Skype, morning and night, a half an hour, 2 hours. You'd be out with Gruff somewhere and he'd say, got to go home, got to talk to Elka. So this went on for, you know, that 7 into 8. So then he tells me, I'm going to meet Elka on the corner, same place, same time, although that changed, on the anniversary. Because it was warming up. So I can't remember whether Elka couldn't make it or Gruff couldn't make it, so it was a midnight meeting. Gruff goes around the corner, looks down onto the next corner. There she is. It was love. Yep.
So this was the story, as you know. This was a real story. So then it went on that 12 months later, or under 12 months later, we were in Berlin, and Gruff and Elka, of course, came to the Berlin World Champs too.
Well, yeah, Elka had been in Australia in 2009, briefly in February, but we never caught up, and we didn't know her, but we felt like we did, because Gruffy just kept filling us in about this girl. And I kept telling the story to everybody I knew. Can you believe this? They met 12 months later, and like, what a story. It's just crazy. So I was telling everybody, and anybody that ever asked after Gruff, I'd tell them the story. So anyway, we both realised we're going to be in Berlin for the 2009 World Champs. So we decided to meet. So we're in the hotel. We come to the front of the hotel. Gruff's walking across the quadrangle with Elka. Here they are, they're coming. And Elka walks up to me and I said, hi Elka, I'm Ray. And she said, hi Ray, I'm the story.
Just to finish, we were fortunate enough to see, or to get to Langenfeld. We'd thought for a few years, I want to go and see where Elka lives and is brought up, and where she lived her youth. And it was in Langenfeld, out of Dresden. And for me too, Dresden was where all the East German sprinters trained, so that was of interest to me as well. Last year we did get to Langenfeld, and it was very sad to see Gruffy so ill. And you know, he was doing weights, he was walking the stairs to try and get more strength so that they could just throw as much treatment at him. And unfortunately it didn't work out. But you know, we've been fortunate to have Gruff as a great friend, and now of course Elka as a great friend, and we've known her for 10 years now and caught up on both sides of the world and in many different countries, and we hope that will continue. Whenever we get to Europe, we'll certainly meet up again, and Elka has promised to come out and visit us too in Paradise up on the coast. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ray and Denise. I meant to mention before that Ray and Denise are not only very talented themselves, but they've passed their talents on genetically to the next generation, and thereby they have become, along with the hookers, the sort of the athletics royalty in this country. And good to see Bill and Erica both here today too. Yeah, that wasn't easy, I know, and thank you very much for doing that. There is actually a sequel to the story, which very quickly is that 5 years later, after that encounter, whilst photographing the King and Queen of Sweden, at the London Olympics, Graham and Elka somehow got themselves into the village and into the dining room and were eating there when who should come into the dining room but the King and Queen of Sweden, who had arrived in support of the Swedish team. Elka or Graham, I'm not sure who said that, oh, we have to go and say something. So they bounced up and said, hello King, hello Queen. Do you know that you are responsible for us being partners together? And the King and Queen were very gracious and wanted to know more and entered into a conversation and then posed for a photo together. And you'll see that photo in the loop that will be running upstairs later on. We have many apologies from people who were unable to be here today. I'm not going to go through them all because there's just too many, but there are 4 who are very special to Graham, and so I just want to mention that we have apologies from Bill Scott, from Tony Benson, from Tony Taggart, and from Mrs. Taggart. I now have also a message that has come in from Steve Ovett, who now lives on the Sunshine Coast. I didn't know that he'd actually moved from Victoria, but now lives up there, and he and Caroline say that they would have loved to have come and run a few laps in Graham's honour. He was indeed a true runner's runner, a man that loved his sport and contributed to it in so many ways. As an athlete, I was lucky enough to run against him many times. Being a POM, it was a bit strange to see this little frail-looking Aussie lining up at the start line. He would always say hi and look so relaxed that it would be all too easy to just dismiss him and his casual approach. But as we all know, looks can be very deceiving. As soon as the gun went off, he would latch onto anything that moved and would be a real bugger to shake off. Sensing any weakness, he would take no prisoners, and you would always see the back of that little figure disappearing into the distance. His sudden loss was a shock to all, as he was larger than life in character. But more than that, he was a friend to many and would always go the extra mile. A character, a true legend, and a great athlete. We also have from Ross Haywood. Ross was a fellow Olympian and Commonwealth Games competitor with Graham, and also a life member of this athletic club here at Box Hill. It is with great regret that I am unable to attend today. My years as a Box Hill club mate, Commonwealth and Olympic Games team mate gave me many years with Crouchy. Whilst many will recall his role in the fabulous Christchurch 1500 metre final, it was his Montreal campaign that left me with the memory of what a super competitive international athlete this little fellow was. 3 super 1500 metre efforts in 3 days. In all 3 races, Gruffy hugged the inside, and as a spectator, my heart was pounding. He was blocked and buffeted, but remained cool as a cucumber and delivered the results. In the final, starting with a slow 62-second lap, there was a lot of chopping until 500 metres to go when the pace lifted. It was a race not well suited to him, but Gruffy gave it his best and remained as Australia's last Olympic 1500 metre finalist for another 40 years. It is so easy to take for granted Australian athletes in their competitive years, as we all have our biases and prejudices. But with the passing of time, we need to acknowledge the greatness of individuals in their prime. In my opinion, Graham Crouch achieved that which we should all strive to do: extract every last grain of potential. I remember Gruffy as a delightful ray of optimism and a good friend. It's now my pleasure to introduce Chris Wardlaw. Chris also really needs no introduction. Chris was a fellow Olympian with Graham in 1976 and went on to Olympic representation again in 1980, competed many times with Graham, and then subsequently Chris became a coach and is now on the board of Athletics Australia. And Chris, please come and take this microphone from me.
Thanks, Ian, and it's great to see a lot of people. I have to say my win-loss record against Graham up to 1500 was pretty ordinary, very ordinary. I beat him, I think, once at 5, but I went to the longer stuff to avoid him. Elka, family, friends, Box Hill Athletic Club luminaries, of which there are many here. It's a really evocative location, as has been mentioned already. A great club, one of the greatest clubs in the nation, a great club man, and a great middle distance runner. And what I want to do is, before I make a very brief personal reflection, is read a statement from Athletics Australia in honour of Graham Crouch. At this important occasion, on behalf of Athletics Australia, we are honoured to recognise the life and contribution of Graham Crouch. Gruffy, or Crouchy, as he was widely known among the athletics community, both here and across geographies, he had a large impact and influence on the sport in Australia and the wider world. Graham Crouch broke Herb Elliott's 1500 metre Australian record, and at that moment, Gruffy was the 7th fastest in history. This record was created at the Commonwealth Games, Christchurch, 1974, and is still considered one of the most outrageously superior performance races in history. Graham became an Olympic 1500 finalist in the 76 Olympic Games in Montreal. This remains a rare feat for anyone, male or female, and Australian athletics cherishes those who reach this level of achievement. Among males, Australia has had finalists in the modern World Championships, Doyle and Hillard, but it took 40 years and Ryan Gregson at the Rio Olympic Games to achieve the feat. Graham was national champion in 1500 in 69 and 78 and 5,000 metre champion in 1976. Gruffy was an enthusiastic interclub athlete here at Box Hill and Lamberis in Ballarat, being a member of Box Hill Athletic Club after initially being a member at Ballarat East. No doubt Gruffy learned a great deal of his renowned tactical nous here at Box Hill. Graham served athletics all through his life. While he never retired, because I know we saw him all the time, still with his spikes, couldn't believe it. While he never retired, Gruffy made significant contributions in other ways to athletics, including as a long-serving committee member of Athletics International, advisor to young athletes, particularly those who wanted to follow his footsteps on the European and world circuit, and coaching. In this latter contribution, he guided some of our stars, including Peter Burke, Terry Cater, Michelle Baumgartner, and Scott Peterson. Graham Crouch always knew that the world stage required a high degree of commitment. In the true sense of the word, Gruffy professionalised his approach to the highest level of performance, leading the way for many contemporaries here in Australia. Athletics Australia salutes the life and contribution to athletics of Graham Crouch. So a very brief reflection, because the invigilator's over here. I trained a lot with Gruffy. I remember coming in at Box Hill 10s on a Monday night where he'd smash us sometimes and come through the gate exhausted. I do remember the mile here with Peter Fuller, 3:56. Both of them across the line here. There's a photo in there. Very close finish in sort of modest near darkness. Now I know the Google searches are going to work out whether I was actually here, because we all probably remember we were here, but I think I was here because I definitely remember it so closely, and it was a magnificent race. I was also at 74, what a race, and I followed Gruffy, of course, because I was a teammate in 76 with him, but his wonderful run in Gothenburg, and with Ken Hall, who was here behind Walker in that sub 350 mile, and of course his Olympic run, which was just stellar. I would see Gruffy at many, many championships and inter-club races over the years, and he would always would bump into each other and have chat, and this included Olympics and World Championships and Commonwealth and so forth, but also inter-club races. And he'd say, after seeing the latest middle distance race, which has been a tactical nightmare for some runner, and he'd say, "Rap, have they got a plan? Do they know what they were going to do? Are they prepared for the biggest moment of their careers?" And of course they were rhetorical questions, because Graham knew exactly what they needed to do. But it was always true that he really did have in his head what it meant to perform at the really, really highest level. And it's interesting that we've had the recent passing of Peter Snell and Dick Quacks and Gruffy, all part of a pantheon at the time. And I wonder if some of us reflect on what the afterlife might be. Some of us do, especially as we get closer. Yeah, not me, I'm taking off the years. But in the afterlife, I wonder if we believe that there might be a great athletic meeting to watch and a really great championship 1500 metres. And I'm sure Gruffy would be in the final. And at the 400 metre mark here, he would be right on the plinth in third place, ready to pounce down the back straight. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. That was great. Our next speaker will be Phil Cook, and Phil was a member of this athletic club and a competitor at the time that Graham was running in the 70s, and has remained a lifelong friend with his wife Chris, and also they've got to know Elka very well in the last decade.
Thanks, Ian. Sign of old age, needing glasses to do anything. Thanks, folks. It's a privilege, actually, for me to be here today and to be actually asked to speak, because for all of us who knew Graham, we knew that he had hundreds of friends, not just here, but all around the world. And that's really very special. But I've been asked to comment on some things you may not know about Gruffy. You might, but our memories are based on our personal experiences, of course, so we all have our memories of him, depending on the circumstances. But
I'd just like to perhaps focus on his last couple of years when we did become very close and communicated almost on a daily basis at times. I think for me, one of the major things that whilst athletics was a major part of his life, it did not define him as a person. He had many interests and many activities that he really enjoyed outside of athletics. But he's an interesting character. I mean, the Gruffy we knew was quite stubborn in many ways, very stubborn. And one of the things that always amused me was that when he went to live in Germany with Elke, he refused to learn German despite Elke's encouragement. But Gruffy, as with most things, just had a really practical view. And he just said, well, you know, it's no big deal. Why learn German when you've got a German wife, an English teacher who speaks perfect English? And he had his iPad never left his side, and he could just hit the translate button if he needed to. So there's no problem for Gruffy moving across to Germany. Most of us have all known for a long time that he's had a great love of Aussie rules, loved it to the death, watched all the games, particularly his beloved Cats. He had an encyclopedic knowledge about the Geelong Football Club, the players, when they played, their numbers. I used to quiz him and he never got one wrong. It's quite remarkable, but he had his disappointments. I might say for those Geelong supporters, you might be interested to know that late last year, he believed the Cats premiership window was still open. But he did have his disappointments because he actually expected the Cats to win every year. You know, and he would seriously tell me that since 2008, they should have won another 6 premierships. You know, and he had all the reasons why they should have won. That was his analytical mind. But pretty amusing. I was sitting in the stands of the MCG a couple of years ago when, much to my surprise, the Demons were demolishing the Cats I think it would have been the elimination final, 2018, that's right. And I'm sitting there enjoying this and just wondering how long it'd last, and the phone beeps. And here's a message from Gruffy, who was sitting up with his iPad in Langenfeld at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, and the message simply said, Phil, the Cats are still at Hoppers Crossing. But this was at quarter time. Following that, there was a detailed analysis on the phone as to what had gone wrong with the Cats and what they needed to do to win, full of analysis, statistics. That was, again, the analytical mind of Graham Crouch. But I might say that viewing of the games happened every week. So Elke had to put up with this every week in the football season. And when I'd speak to him, he just didn't know what had happened with the Cats, but all of the results, and he could actually describe passages of play and why Melbourne, as he thought, was so hopeless, and players were good or not good, but he knew everything about every game. It was quite staggering. The other thing that we perhaps don't know that he actually loved all sport. He loved cricket, he loved European soccer, he loved even the European winter sports. And he particularly loved tennis, which is a love of Elke's. He really did love tennis. His favourite player being Roger Federer, the Fed Express, who for Gruffy just epitomised perfection in sport. Worked hard, brilliant, but the perfect gentleman, modest to boot. So, his iPad, as I said, never left his sight. He was actually a really good researcher and planner. On one of Gruffy and Elke's visits to Australia, they ventured, I think Elke will remember this, they ventured into the Adelaide Hills to search for Gruffy's German ancestors. He had German ancestors. This was another connection to Germany and to Elka. And did some scrub bashing to discover some deserted graves, and they were the graves of the ancestors. He photographed them for his extensive photos which he had on his iPad. Gruffy loved to travel, exploring new places and revisiting old. On his trips back to Victoria, he loved showing Elka his favourite places, including, of course, his spiritual home of Ballarat, always in his mind. He also, quirky Graham, with a sense of humour, used to show Elka what he called Australiana. Now, Australiana wasn't just the sights, but it also included run-down country properties full of rusting cars, rusting farm equipment, rusting metal, sort of thing you see every day in country Victoria, but not something found in Germany. He followed politics, overseas and here locally, closely, read and followed. He had strong views about a range of subjects and would have long conversations about immigration, Angela Merkel, the socialist welfare state. God, don't get him on the socialist welfare state. My left-wing leanings always took a beating. But they were not ideological views, really. It wasn't really ideology. It was just common sense. He just would speak from a perspective of knowledge, information, and common sense, rather than take ideological positions. But he also closely followed in Germany what was happening here every day. Australian news, Melbourne news. Sitting down to dinner one night with Elka and Chris, I'm sorry to remind you of this, Elka, he expanded on the Me Too movement in detail, and in particular the Robert Doyle affair, and what had all gone wrong. I think at that stage it was Elka was somewhat dismayed where the conversation was going, but he loved it. He loved it. He just loved it. He was well informed, he had opinions, and he just loved conversation. And as we all know, he was incredibly hard to shut up. Whether it was his hearing or not, he just kept talking. And as somebody pointed out, if he didn't agree with you, or he hated negativity, never said a bad word about anybody, hated negativity. So sometimes I'd always throw some controversial questions to him, and he'd just look at me blankly and just not answer, or look the other way, rather than say something he didn't want to say. So he's quite intuitive, quite empathetic like that. Gruffy's relocation to Germany did involve one experience that he had not bargained for. With some embarrassment and affront to his modesty, he attended a nudist beach. Do you imagine this? On a lake near his hometown. Of course, he probably told Elka that nude sunbathing was not a popular pastime in Ballarat or Melbourne, for that matter. Gruffy reluctantly agreed to go, but as Elka, I think, explained, spent most of his time readjusting his towel or lying on his stomach. Gruffy used his iPad to catalogue the renovation of he and Elka's beautiful old home in Langenfeld, which we've been talking about today. The house was furnished superbly in a modest but modern manner. There was actually a slight suspicion that Gruffy liked shopping and hunting for furniture bargains and visiting IKEA. Yeah. When we were there on a visit, he did take us on a tour of the house, telling us, quote, "This is home, Phil, this is home, this is it." And he meant it, he loved it, he loved the house, he loved living in Germany, he loved living with Elka. Up till his diagnosis, I think it's fair to say, Elka, that Gruffy continued to run most days. It included running in all sorts of weather and snow as well. And to the locals, he was just that crazy little Aussie, that crazy little Australian, because people didn't do that in Langenfeld. When Chris and I visited in 2018, Gruffy was concerned about his knee lift, thinking that his knee lift wasn't as good as it could be. So he's doing run-ups up the hill beside the house, and then run-ups up the backyard, which was on a slope, and then took me to a couple of beautiful synthetic running tracks with his bikes to do his run-throughs. And I took videos of him doing all of this, and he was thrilled because he said he had not seen any film of himself since Montreal. But he was concerned about that knee lift. He was also concerned about Elka's knee lift, and that the way she ran, she just wouldn't generate enough speed. You know, it's unbelievable, isn't it? Always the perfectionist, always looking for improvement, but always looking for speed. He enjoyed art and culture, believe it or not. He enjoyed art and culture, and Elka and Graham loved going to concerts, and he introduced Elka to the My Music Bowl, wasn't it? The free concerts, which he loved. Okay, I better wrap up, I think. In the last 9 months, Gruffy used his iPad to research his illness, check out physicians and treatment, and did not leave a stone unturned to beat his cancer. Perhaps it was the mind was willing right up to the end. The mind was incisive. He could talk about anything. His last text to me was concern about Joel Selwood's concussion, and concerning that after the Ballantine hit down at Cardinia Park, that Selwood had not been the same since. Anyway, those are the sorts of conversations we had. As most of you will know, he loved people. He just loved people. He loved conversation. He loved making connections with people, and he maintained these friendships when he went to Germany via his iPad and iPhone. He loved the contact, but also his friends loved the contact as well. He was loyal to a T, treated all his friends in the same way, irrespective of who they were. Past Olympic greats were treated in the same way as old mates from Ballarat or Melbourne. All were equal in Graham's eyes. I might say Gruffy, I'd always been curious as to where the nickname Gruffy had come from. And he told me just recently, where's Ray, that actually Ray Boyd coined the term Gruffy. Is that right, Ray? No? You're not... Oh. Anyway. Graham, Crouchy, for most of us, he was always Gruffy. If he was here today, all I know is he wouldn't want a fuss to be made. He'd want us all to keep going. And he'd probably just be somewhere up the back there and would say something like, well, folks, or well, Phil, what do you reckon? Not a bad turn-up. That'd be Gruffy. But he was admired, respected, liked, and loved. All of those things. And he's a very special person.
Thanks, Phil. I'm now going to give the microphone to Lee Miller, who just wants to say a few words. Lee is the generation after Graham, but he will tell you about his connections to Graham, I'm sure. And I'm very happy to hand the microphone now to Lee.
Welcome everybody. I'm probably not going to talk about my connections with Gruffy. There's just a couple of things I did want to say though and make you aware of. We all know Gruffy was a great coach, mentor and friend to so many of us here today and those abroad. He had an affinity to athletics and the Box Hill Athletic Club. And he was a conduit for many great athletes that started in Ballarat and ended up running for Box Hill. Some of those athletes are here today. John Walsh, his great friend and great distance runner. And he's one of Gruffy's closest friends. And Gruffy had many friends, some very close. John, I know you were close. And I know you're deeply saddened by Gruffy's death. Monners is here as well today. Probably can't get any more great athletes from Ballarat. Well, welcome, Monners. Gruffy didn't limit himself to Box Hill athletes though. Peter Burke, I see here today. He didn't run for Box Hill, but that didn't stop Gruffy from coaching a rival athlete from Glen Huntly. And coached him so great that he won a Commonwealth Games gold medal in Brisbane 1982. I heard a story the other night about that. It reminded me about Berkey kicking a football the day or the days before the running of the final of the 800 metres. The media criticised Gruffy for this happening, and probably Berkey. And Gruffy didn't complain or defend the actions, and Peter went on to win the gold medal. So, pretty impressive stuff there. He probably said to Pete, like he said to others, and we've all heard this, don't you worry about that. To know Gruffy and have him on your team was a win and an experience. His contacts within athletic circles was prolific because of his character and his genuine nature. He had a great friend in Heinrich and Uta in Copenhagen, and they can't be here today, but I know, and Elke has told me, that they feel it more than most, as Gruffy was their Australian son. Gruffy wanted to see Heinrich and Uta at Christmas, but he never made it there. Hearing from the great John Walker and Steve Ovett show us how rivalry on the track developed into long-lasting friendships. Gruffy often spoke of John Walker, and he was shattered when John became ill. He knew John was a battler like himself and gave him his full support. He always showed great compassion for others, and as Phil said, he remained positive throughout everything. Travelling with Gruffy was an experience. Somehow, when all the chips seemed to be down, he'd managed to conjure up a lane for his athlete in an athletic meet, a seat on a plane that didn't exist, a seat on a bus, a bed or a meal in a hotel at many destinations. He was very covert in the way that he made this happen. As an athlete, you just let him do his thing, and it usually ended up okay. And at this point, I'd just like to mention the late Maury Plant as well. We recently lost to illness. Maury, like Gruffy, he could also make things happen, but he was more overt in his actions, and they were both pillars in the athletic world. On the 28th of November last year, Box Hill Athletic Club ran a meeting down here. Several weeks prior to the running of that meet, a plan was hatched by Steve Ellinghouse and Alex Davies, and that was to propose that a 1500 metre race be named in honour of Gruffy and his achievements on the track. From that plan, the Graham Crouch Trophy was created, and I believe it's going to be an annual event on the athletic calendar. The cup's here today. It's got his name on it. The inaugural winner of that race was Andre Waring, who's come along today, and probably didn't realise on the night what an occasion it was, and he's now probably going to be the first in a long list of people to come down here and compete for the cup. On the same night, the women's race, they had a 1500 metres race won by Sarah Billings. I don't believe the cup's yet been named, but maybe Box Hill Athletic Club or someone can put up a name for that as well. The two races can be held on the same night. Gruffy knew about this event being held in the hours before he passed away. We took photographs and I sent those photographs to him. Elke told me that it brought a smile to his face. He passed away peacefully not long after. They're the only stories I'm going to tell of Gruffy, and I'm sure that there's many that we can tell. Thank you.
Thanks, Lee. That actually ends the speakers for this evening. And just before we do our lap of honour, I want to just say again, thank you very much to the Box Hill Club for hosting this event here tonight. And in particular, I want to thank the team of volunteers who have worked so hard to put everything together so that this would be a fitting occasion and a fitting memory of Graham. Just a little bit of housekeeping. We do want to have a record of everybody who attended. So if you didn't get a chance to sign the registration sheets as you arrived, could you please make sure you do so before you leave? I think now it's time for us to move on to the track, those who want to, for the lap of honour. As you go around, just watch out for some of those younger people that are hurtling along at several times our pace.
Involved in Athletics International when I was on the committee, so he stayed involved right through all those years.
And he was on the committee?
Yeah, he was actually on the committee, yeah. The only sad thing about Crouchy was that he ran for Box Hill. I think that if he'd had a better opportunities, you never know what he might have done.
We shouldn't have given this man an opportunity like that. Over to Stephen.
And from my own experience, obviously a legend of Ballarat and the Ballarat running scene, but I never really appreciated Gruffy as a runner, but I remember him coaching a lot of the athletes down at the track, and God, he was a hard man, and certainly a person that I admired. But his contribution to athletics and the Ballarat athletics scene, but obviously Australian athletics more generally, it's great to see it so recognised, and just a great fella, and terrific to be able to enjoy some of his company, because he's always a person who spoke so intelligently about athletics.
Graham and I first met back in the late 80s. And I was running for YCW in Ballarat, and came down to the track and knew that Gruffy had that affiliation with Ballarat and been a wonderful athlete. We'd actually gone to the same school, Ballarat and Clarendon College together, and I hooked up with Graham, and he took me to the Nationals over a couple of years, and we become wonderful friends, and he'll be dearly missed. But someone mentioned thrashing the body. That was one of his always get to the track, thrash the body, attack the line, and he was big on that. He'd leave no stone unturned, and you'd follow everything that he told you because of the respect, because of the man, and because of his history. And but number one was probably his friendship. A wonderful friend to whoever was in his life, and he very, very sadly missed. And today was just a wonderful tribute to him, and covered him as a person, an athlete, and the Graham Douglas crowd, the guts, determination, and courage. I never knew that until today, so that was wonderful to hear that, and that sums him up, Ian. So fantastic.
I saw his 1500 metre run in Christchurch from our flat in Earl's Court in London, and it was replayed on almost a continuous cycle all the way through the Saturday it was in London then on the BBC. So by dinner time that night I'd seen the race 10 times, and I never tired of looking at it then, and I don't tire of looking at it now.
No, neither do I.
Well, certainly I overlapped with Graham quite a lot. We had a lot of races. We were racing each other. Certainly in Europe as well as in Melbourne. I think we'd always argue that if one beat the other, that we weren't fit. So something like that, and it was very, very competitive. He was initially, when I first went to Europe, I think, if I remember rightly, he gave me some contact details to help me out over there. He probably wasn't quite so cooperative later on, a few more years later on after that when I improved. I mean, the thing I always think about Graham was how professional he was. That, you know, people talked earlier about him never leaving the plinth race. He was always very professional about how he approached races and exactly how he positioned himself to races, and you couldn't fault his professionalism about things generally. Yeah.
Yes, I have vivid memories. In 1975, Graham and I were both invited to Czechoslovakia to run at their meeting, one of the first meetings on the calendar. So there was Tony, my husband, travel with us. So Graham's in the window seat, I'm in the middle, and Tony's on the aisle seat, and there was about that much leg room, and because we had to get off the plane and virtually run. So we're all cooped up, and next minute, after we changed flights and got to Singapore, we had to get on a Russian airline called OK Jets, and this is where we were so crowded. But at one point, Graham looked down the side there and he could see smoke going along the side of the plane inside. And he said, I don't know whether we're on fire or what, but anyway, apparently it was only some sort of steam. But there was no food. All they were bringing was sort of lollies, and you know, there was no meal. It was an 8-hour flight into Bratislava. But by the time we got out, all crushed and crumbled. But we had a fantastic trip in 75. We were travelling through Europe with Graham and the New Zealand athletes, Walker and Quacks and Dixon. We rented all those, what they call now, Grand Prix meets. So we had a fabulous time, and I have really fond memories of Graham. He was a dear friend right up until, I mean, you know, even though he was overseas, we on Facebook and message and email and things. So, yeah, he'll be really missed from the sport.
A privilege to talk about Graham, or Gruffy as we know him, and I suppose the greatest testament I can say to Graham is that I left Glen Huntly, which was a very controversial thing at the time, to go and to join Box Hill, but mainly I did that to train with Gruffy because he was the best going around. Alan Barlow was also the coach, but I could see if I wanted to improve that the best way to do it was to go to the best, and Gruffy was the best at the time. Cheers.
Boyd is closing the gap and leading Rod Dixon through, and John Walker of New Zealand, Jipcho 5, Crouch is 6, Foster 7, Fitzsimons 8, Niambwe 9. Pai now battling to last the pace. The crowd helping, but the chasers are closing, and it's Boyd leading them still. So they come to the bell now in the metric mile. The tiny Tanzanian in front, then Jipcho, free and easy second. The Black Shadows of Rod Dixon and Walker go through now, second and third. The little Australian Crouch is next. Boyd going right back as Foster begins down the back straight for England. And Bai holding his lead. The Black Bess of New Zealand in second and third. But they're not closing on the leader, and Jipcho makes his run now on the outside. 200 metres left in this devastating race. It's Bai first for Tanzania. Jipcho closing with every stride and chasing his third goal. And the untapped talent of Walker now coming through with Dixon. The Black Shadows together. Jipcho is beaten, and will they get Bai? 80 metres left. And it's Walker chasing Bai, but Bai won't be caught. Bai got it with it. And approaches it. It's very close to the world record. Bai wins. Walker next, Jipcho next, Dixon next. And the world record has been taken apart. This, one of the great world records, run by Jim Ryan in 1967, 3:33.1, beaten by almost a full second. And Bailly did it from gun to tape.